Amy, hi, this is Jim Delapine, and I want to give you some additional tips and suggestions regarding your character. And the background that you chose is actually perfect if you want to put your fairy into a realistic situation. So, I mean, she looks like she belongs on the road, so it's interesting. It's hard to do, so you got the right picture and it works. So, good eye on that. So, let me just go down here. Let me just hide. Let me just go to the Move tool and make sure auto select is checked so that any time I click on any part of the image, it's going to bring me right to that layer. So I'm just going to hide that layer. And I note that you did a great job. I see that you fixed the wings, for lack of a better word. That was a bit rough. Okay, let me go back to Control 0 again to fit in the window and show the background again. And it looks as though you've been really, I mean, you're focusing on all the right things. I note that, for example, this levels adjustment layer was not clipped, so I thought that was an issue or something that you forgot to do. But when I hide it, I see that before is it lacks the contrast that this additional levels adjustment layer gives this. So that's a good choice. So I see that you understand what you're doing, okay? Because others that are clipped are appropriate, okay? So, but this looks. Let's just let me show you some additional things that you can do to possibly make this more fantasy oriented, okay? Because this is a kind of a boring background for a Fantasia fairy, you know. So let me see here. Let me go to the background. I'm going to select that layer, and I'm going to create a hue saturation adjustment layer. Okay. So by default, it comes in clips, which you really don't need because there's nothing below the bottom layer that requires um, that you clip this. So you can unclip them, and it only affects the layers below. So there's nothing below that layer. So there's no, it's not necessary. So the hue saturation properties here. All right, so the hue represents color, saturation represents the richness of color, and lightness represents obviously the lightness, darkness. So let's work with the hue and possibly change the color here to make it more fantasy oriented. So, and again, these are just suggestions because you've done everything else right. You even have the channels saved correctly. Although if I control click on this thumbnail for the channel, I see that it's just a selection that's, it's kind of random, but you accomplish the task of creating a selection, a channel out of a saved selection that's renamed. So um, you've got that under your um, tasks that have been performed. So let's just go here and so you can work with the U and change this to choose like a color swatch or color palette that looks fantasy oriented to you. So I'll just choose this. And then you can increase the saturation, or richness of color if you want, do something crazy. It's up to you. Okay. And then what you can do is you could also, just to show you this, okay, you can also focus on her and then blur out the background. So let's see. I'm going to go to my elliptical marquee tool, and I'm going to create an oval selection. Let me reposition that by holding down my space bar, letting go of the space bar, and coming in here. I don't know what I'm doing here. I'm just kind of winging it. No pun intended. All right, so I'll just go something like this, okay? All right, so I'll reposition this over here. And now what I'm going to do is save this selection. All right, so here's a method. You had asked this question about selections and saving them and what they're for. So I expressed that to you. Here's another way of looking at what save selections as channels can do for you. So I'm going to feather this. I don't know where to find it, but I know the shortcut is Shift F6. All right, so right now, the last time I feathered it was 22 pixels, so it's still there. So I'll just accept that. That's what it looks like. Actually, before I do that, I'm going to save the selection. Select, save selection, and I'm not even going to name it. Okay, well, I'll name it crazy text, okay? All right, so here we have, in this channel, we have the saved channel that's named, and if you click on it, this is the black and white version of it. So channels are all black and white, okay? So or I should say, they work based on grayscale. Okay. So what I'm going to do now is feather this. So Shift F6. I'll do 22. Okay. So and now I'll save that. So you can't preview what a saved selection that's been or a selection that's been feathered looks like unless you save it as a channel. Um, so let me just save that selection. I'll just call this 3. Okay. All right. So now this is the saved selection that's been feathered. All right. This is the unfeathered version. All right. So it's not even close to being enough. So let me just load this selection again by control clicking on this thumbnail. And I'm going to feather this again, but this time I'm going to go to something more dramatic, 66. So I'm now feathering a feathered selection. All right. Let me just save. Let's see. Save that selection. And I'll save it as the same thing. So it'll, no. All right. So that's the 66 feathers version. I'm really not too crazy about that still. Let me just select, let me just feather this one more time. Whoops. Shift 6. All right. So now I feathered it at 86, 88 pixels. All right. Now what I'm going to do is, so back to my layers here. Let me go back to this layer here. All right. So now what I'm going to do is this. I'm going to duplicate the background layer just so I have the saved version of it. Okay. So actually I can't do that. Let me just save the selection first, and I'll just type in new. Okay. Then I'll deselect and now duplicate this layer here. Control J. If I duplicated it with that selection in place, or actually use that shortcut of Control J with that selection in place, it would have copied that selection and brought it to the layer above. With no selection active, Control J will duplicate a layer. Okay, so I'm going to work on the duplicated version. I'm going to load my selection. All right, the new selection. So Control clicking here. I can also go to select load selection and then choose what selection I wanted to load. But this is a shorter way of doing that, quicker way of doing that. So now we have a blurry, a feathered oval, and what I'm going to do is inverse the selection. Okay, so what I'm going to do is blur out the background. Okay, everything outside the selection, but in a graduated fashion. Okay, it'll be clear inside here, but then it'll become blurry out here. So that means I have to apply a command to blur out a certain area that I want to blur out. So that means instead of, if I did a blurring now, and I'll do that here. Blur, let me see, blur, I'm going to go to blur, Gaussian blur, so this way we can see the preview. All right. So now I'm going to increase the radius here. And with preview checked, I should see an immediate result here. So notice how the background behind her is blurring out. And it's not nearly, you see that? So I want the exact opposite. I want everything else to blur out except her. So I will inverse the selection. Shift F7. So now everything else but the oval around her is selected. And you can see the oval around the outer edges. Now I will go to filter blur, Gaussian blur, and bring it all the way up so you can see the dramatic difference here. So that's one way of actually this should have been more of a feathering in here, more of a gradation. So, but something like that, could give you that look. Okay. All right. I encourage you to experiment along those lines. Okay. You can also do this. let me see. Watch. Let me see this. I can make the background black and white. It's a good thought. How would I do that? Let's see. I'm going to load this selection again. All right, this thought just occurred to me now. So Shift F7. What I'm considering doing is making the background not only blurry but black and white. Okay. So if I now go to my adjustment layers, I have that layer active, and now go to, let's see, where is it? Black and white, right here. Okay, there you go. So it's an adjustment layer. You could also edit this, to make it less black and white, but that's another way of getting a certain look. Okay, and notice that I did that with an active selection. If I didn't have that active oval selection that's feathered, then it would be applied to the entire layer. Okay, so it isolated it using this layer mask. Okay, all right, I'm gonna stop here. Okay, have a safe journey. All right, okay, take care.